Good evening. My name is Matt Abbott. I am the Director of Government and Diplomatic Programs here at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. I'd like to welcome Minister Guðlaugur Thor Thordarson. We're honored to host him here on the Council's platform. I would also like to thank the leadership and staff at the Consulate General of Iceland in New York and the Icelandic American Chamber of Commerce for their support on this program. And after tonight's program, we hope you will join the Minister and Trade Delegation with which he is traveling for a networking reception that has been generously supported by Mayor Brown. Turning back to the program, the Chicago Council on Global Affairs is an independent, nonpartisan organization. Views expressed by individuals we host are their own and do not represent institutional positions or views of the Council. Please note that this event is on the record and we are live streaming. We welcome your engagement on social media, but please silence your phones. We will also be taking questions from the audience after the Minister's remarks, and those of you joining us by live stream can submit your questions online by visiting chi.cnf.io. Before I turn it over to the Minister, I would like to briefly introduce him. Minister Thordarson has served as Iceland's Minister for Foreign Affairs since January 2017. He has been a Member of Parliament since 2003, and he also previously served as Minister of Health. Prior to his service in Parliament, he served on the Reykjavik City Council. He completed his undergraduate work at the University of Iceland. Now please join me in welcoming Minister Thordarson.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, first I would like to say how honored we are, Augusta, my wife, and me, to be invited here today and to this beautiful city. I think it's more than 30 years since I first came to Chicago, and it's just get better each time around. Waking up this morning, walking by the shore, and looking outside on the lake and back to the spectacular view of the skyscrapers behind me, my mind wandered to the very beginning of the city. It came to my mind that this city is basically founded on the idea of free trade and stands as a symbol of what can be achieved by trading freely. And looking out on the lake, then of course remembered Iceland and the sea around it. And for you who do not know, then we pride ourselves, the Icelanders, to both catch and sell fresh fish, especially fresh fish, to other countries and other continents. But we are not alone when it comes to that. Our friends, close neighbors, the Norwegians, they also pride themselves for a reason to doing so. So when I went to official visits a few months ago to Norway with my president, then you can imagine that the program was more or less that we were telling each other how good we were at both trading and selling fresh fish. And I was so lucky to meet a great man, King Harald, at lunchtime. And of course we started talking about fish. And he said to me, when we were talking about how fresh our fish was, I said, this wasn't always like that. And I said, well, what do you mean? Well, a few decades ago, in the largest fish market in Bergen, then a guy came in and he started to smell the fish. And the owner of the fish market was not very pleased. He came to this guy and said, what are you doing? You realize this is food for humans. You cannot just go and smell the fish. And this guy said, I'm not smelling the fish. And the owner said, what do you mean? I'm just speaking to the fish. Speaking to the fish? What do you say to the fish? I'm just asking the fish a question. Which question? I asked him how the situation was at the North Sea. And what did the fish say? He said he had no idea. He hadn't been there for 3 weeks. But things have changed. So, dear guests, I want to focus on 3 things in my short speech here today. Free trade in today's world, rules-based international trade, and thirdly, Brexit and transatlantic relations. Afterwards, I hope we can have a good and thorough Q&A session, and after that, I sure hope we enjoy a drink or two together. First, let's talk about trade, free and fair trade. Ronald Reagan once said that if you put three economists together in a room and ask them a question, you're liable to get more than three answers. It's true, economists don't often agree. But there is one issue on which almost all responsible economists, whatever their political persuasions, are unanimous. And then he went to say, and I quote, "They agree that free and fair trade brings growth and opportunity and creates jobs. They all warn that high trade barriers, what is often called protectionism, undermines economic growth and destroys jobs. I don't call it protectionism. I call it destructionism. That is why our motto is free and fair trade with free and fair traders." Those words were spoken in a radio address by President Reagan in 1986. Back then, and for years to come afterwards, America was the world champion of free trade. The role of America was incredibly important. In the past decades, more people have been lifted out of poverty than ever before in history. Why is that? For centuries, Iceland was one of the poorest countries in Western Europe, now amongst the richest in the world. Why? The answer to both of these questions is free trade. Despite Iceland being rich on natural resources, we were poor. It wasn't until we became a sovereign country and gained access to foreign markets and opened up our own that we became rich. The same has happened in the last few decades in other parts of the world. And the changes are happening faster than anyone could have expected. A century ago, Europe was the economic powerhouse of the world. The power on the wealth was in Europe, and the 25th of the world population lived there. Now it's 9%, and in 2030 it will be 6%. And Europe is far behind the new economic superpowers. There's a tremendous rise in consumption and purchasing power of a rapidly rising middle class in Asia, Latin America, and not least Africa. The middle class in China alone is now larger than the entire North American population. India's middle class is growing at a very fast rate. The same goes for Brazil and the young nations of Africa. In 2 decades, these countries have jumped over hurdles that the old economies took centuries to tackle. How do we respond? The barriers to free trade are not necessarily the old tariffs, but technical barriers and uneven playing ground. We need to enable and empower, and we need to take care of not upsetting the balance of sustainability along the way. We need to pursue free trade, which makes fair trade in the same way Ronald Reagan advocated in 1986. And that brings me to my second point, rules-based international trade. One of the most important things for the success of free trade is a common set of rules. But rules are not enough on their own. Everyone can create rules, but rules without values and respect for human rights are meaningless. There is an old joke from the Cold War that explained this argument. What is the difference between the Constitution of the USA and the Soviet Union? Both of them, for example, guarantee freedom of speech. Yes, but the Constitution of the US also guarantees freedom after speech. And the new economic superpowers of the world do not share our culture and values when it comes to rules and respect for human rights. As their influence grows, this becomes more dangerous. As Ronald Reagan said, we want a fair and free trade with fair, free traders. And the WTO and GATT before them, these institutions, which was built up on the leadership of the US, didn't foresee that we could have at the same time development countries, which are developing countries, and economic superpowers. This is, of course, not fair. We desperately need the rules to catch up with the rapid changes. What really worries me is what happens when and if international free trade will be shaped by powers who do not share our values of free and open democracies, where respect for human rights and the rule of law is a fundamental part of economic liberty, a core element of free and fair trade. That is why we need America to assume its leadership role once again and apply positive influences on international trade. Dear guests, my third and final point is about Brexit and transatlantic relations. The UK is leaving the European Union. Brexit continues to be an absolute priority issue for Iceland. Globally, UK is our second most important trade partner after the US. Brexit is not taking place in isolation. There are negative forces at play in world trade today, and I'm sure that you agree with me that recent signs are very troubling. The main forces behind Brexit were not isolationism or protectionism, as many people would like you to believe. No, on the contrary, Brexit was driven by free traders with the aim to establish UK as trading partner in rapidly changing world. Iceland is committed to furthering liberalization of world trade, and our Brexit policy is a manifestation of this. We wish to cultivate the opportunities Brexit will provide and tackle the challenges with a pragmatic approach that takes note of political realities. Brexit continues to be an absolute priority issue for Iceland. Globally, the UK is our second most important trade partner, which covers a variety of areas: fish, aviation, tourism, investment, and etc. This all falls under the EEA agreement. Iceland's long-term strategic objective is simple: to secure at least the same level of trade relations with the UK as we enjoy today, and even to strengthen our ties where possible. We welcome the important steps which have been taken by European leaders last March with a view to agreement on transition periods and the increased level of clarity this provides for coming months. We have always maintained that Europe cannot lose focus on the main task ahead, which is to carve out a pragmatic way to move forward and avoid the terminal effect of barriers trade in Europe. For me, it's unthinkable that we will see in the near future trade barriers in Europe. I think it's fair to say that as time passes and the EU and the UK dive further down in negotiation, more and more people are realizing this on both sides of the channel. This is most welcome. As an EEA EFTA state, Iceland's stakes in the ongoing negotiation are very high. We have a special status as a member of the internal market through the EEA agreement, and we are committed to maintain the integrity of this market. Therefore, we consider ourselves to be more than just any other third country partner to the EU. There is an important distinction between Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Norway on the other hand, and other non-EU countries on the other. We have not been fully confident that the European Commission views this in the same way as we have been advocating Brussels to make a more flexible approach. We are, after all, in the same boat. We welcome the clarity that the transition agreements provided, but we would have wished for a trilateral solution to be found to fully safeguard the functioning of the internal market during transition. This is not the case, which leaves us negotiating bilaterally with the UK on issues that are essentially internal market by nature. In the short term, to guarantee continuity for business and citizens, our goal is to ensure that any EEA relevant parts of the withdrawal agreements, including the transition period, also applies to the EEA EFTA states. First and foremost, safeguarding citizen rights is a priority area which we are working towards with our UK friends. There is a broad political support and understanding from the UK to ensure such an outcome, and I am confident that a sound technical solution will be found. I would like to underline that Iceland remains fully committed to the EEA, and we highly value the solid framework which it provides for our relations with the European Union and other member states. In the long term, our goal is to maintain a very strong relationship with the UK following its departure from the EU. The objective is to ensure at least the same level of trade relations with the UK as we enjoy today, hopefully even better. Apart from the Nordic family, the UK is one of our closest allies and most important economic partner, and we believe we are now in a unique position to further promote free trade between our countries. In our view, it is very important to seize this opportunity to deliver on furthering free and mutually beneficial trade. We want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. To be blunt, for us, it is a question of being first in line or last in line when the UK starts negotiating, and we are taking substantial initiative in this regard. And this brings me to the transatlantic relations. I think it's safe to say that the possibility of a free trade agreement with the UK as the sixth strongest economy in the world will be in high demand. I believe that the UK will seek to secure a free trade deal with the US following Brexit. And the US should open its arms to such a deal. America needs to establish its role as the free trade champion of the world, and a free trade agreement with UK would surely be a signal of that intent. But the same goes with other countries, and should I remind you, especially Iceland. And to be honest, it is simply ridiculous that Iceland has a free trade deal with China, but not one with our closest allies for decades, namely the USA. And one could say, Iceland is such a small market, but small markets are also often good markets, and small is beautiful, believe me. We are good consumers, and I can promise you, China is not losing from a free trade deal with Iceland. And I think it's fair to say, and actually extremely important, as I've been mentioning before, that the countries who share the same values should stick together, especially at this time in history. Dear guests, I would finally like to thank the Chamber for organizing this trip and for their outstanding job throughout the years to encourage trade between our countries. I would also like to thank the Chicago Council on Global Affairs and Mayor Brown for hosting and sponsoring this event. Let us not forget that free trade is more than exchange of goods and services for money. Free trade is breaking down barriers. Free trade is communication between people in different parts of the world. Free trade is people of different culture understanding each other. Free trade means promoting peace. So let's trade. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your remarks. We have time for some questions now from the audience. If you have a question, please raise your arm, and once I've acknowledged you, a member of our staff will bring a microphone to you. For our audience joining us by live stream, you may also ask your questions by visiting chi.cnf.io. And our first question will be from our live stream audience. What are your views on the future of the EU, especially post-Brexit?
Well, we are not a member of the EU, as you might know, and one of the reasons we are not a member of the EU is that we want to trade freely. I think we have best of both worlds as be a member of the EEA, so we are a part of the internal market. But at the same time, we can make our own free trade agreements, and we do it mostly through EFTA, but also bilaterally, as we have done with China. The countries of EU is, of course, our close allies and friends, but there are challenges ahead, and maybe because of Brexit, it hasn't been that much discussed in the media. And I wish them all the luck when it comes to taking on these challenges. But there will be some, and I think that you have a little split between, you could say, the political elite, especially in Brussels, and the public in the countries. Could say that the elite is more focused on more integration, but I think that people would like to see less of that, and it's hard to foresee what will happen in the near future. But I'm hoping that if we go to the right direction, that's why I'm urging especially the US to grab the opportunities which are definitely there when it comes to liberalizing and more free trade. And I hope that the EU will go in the same direction. But of course, I don't know. But we will, of course, I just hope that they will go on that path and take on the challenges they do have, because it's very important, not only for Iceland, but the rest of the world, that they will be successful.
Another question from our online audience. Where do you see the most opportunities for Iceland to engage with the US under the current American administration?
Well, I think it's important, and that's the reason I stress, that I think it's important that the countries who share the same values, they stick together. We might have all kinds of opinion when it comes to different administrations, but we have election regularly in those countries, and the friendship between Iceland and the US is based on a very solid ground. It's been there for decades, so it's always the same opportunities that we see. The more we have not only you're not only our most important trading partner, but also when it comes to security and defense, we work together on NATO. We have bilateral agreement when it comes to this, and we haven't got any other signals from the new administration that they are willing to work with us on those fields. So it doesn't really matter what kind of administration you have. Each time, it's always the same task, but I think it's extremely important, not only Iceland and the US, but we could say the Western world, or the countries who share the same values, that we should stick together more than ever now.
In the front row, Mr. Porat, please.
Very, very interesting. And you mentioned your agreement with China. One of the major concerns of the US is the Northern Sea towards the North Pole of China and Russia getting into it and trying to take away more and more territory. Are they using you is question number one. Question number two is, what's Iceland's position about the Northern Sea? And because it'll get you a lot more fish.
First, on the question if China is using us, well, we have had good relations with China, and we were the first Western nation to make a free trade agreement with China, and so far it suited us well, and I think them too. And so there are no complaints when it comes to that. But you mentioned a big thing which I didn't go through in my short speech, which that we will see a big total different, could say, transportation when the Arctic opens up. And I think that at this moment, there are especially two nations who have a clear strategy of how to respond to that. One is Russia and the other is China. And I urge US and Canada and also European countries to be more aware of what is changing now. Because what is happening is simply similar to when the Suez Canal and the Panama Canal opened up. We will see that transportation between Europe and Asia will shorten by 40% when these sailing routes opens up. And it's very important that the Arctic will not be an area of tension. Sustainability is the key there, not only when it comes to environmental thing, but also when it comes to social. We have 4 million people living there, and it's very important that they will make good of the activities, the economic activities there. And it's extremely important, of course, that this delicate nature which is there, that they will be treated as it should be. And as I mentioned, sustainability is the key. This is one of the big issues that we need to discuss. It connects to free trade and a lot of other things also.
Iceland had a difficult time during the Great Recession. It's one of the smallest economies in the world to have its own central bank and free-floating currency. What lessons do you think the country learned and its government learned from the latest recession, and have there been changes in monetary policy in light of attracting investment and trade that you can speak of coming out of that?
Well, this is a good question. What lessons have we learned? I think that the biggest lesson should be that the risk assessment we didn't have the necessary risk assessment. So for us, it was a costly mistake to have such a huge banking sector, because it's just too much risk. What we can learn, though, from the experience, that few things we did right. That's probably the reason we have managed to get out of it so quickly. First, which I think is extremely important, that we, before the crisis, we have paid down our public debt. That's, of course, important for every nation, but especially small nation. I think the Emergency Act, which was then led by our Prime Minister in a consensus, which simply meant that the banks, the owners of the banks, they lost their ownership, and also the ones who were financing the bank were the one who lost a lot, but we managed to save the deposit. Is the way we should have a banking system, because I think one of the problems with the banking system in the Western world, and we were no exception before for the emergency regulation, is that when banks are doing well, the owners profit a lot, but when do badly or get bankrupt, then the taxpayer pay the bill. That's probably not the way we should have it. And also we could deal with things as ISAVE, and also how we managed to get our deal with the creditors was something that we could do because we're a sovereign nation. When it comes to the monetary policy, that's one of the things that we have been looking at since, and we have a special committee who is looking into it, and they will come with their views on things in a few months, because it's of course always a challenge when you're a small nation with your own currency. If you adopt some other currency, there are also challenges, because there's no simple solutions there. But when it comes to monetary policy, there's been a lot of discussion, and we have that work going on now, and we hopefully find some suggestion in the very near future.
Yes, sir, in the fourth row, please.
Sir, are elementary, middle, and high schools in Iceland financed through property taxes like in the United States?
No, they are not financed especially with that tax. They are funded by governmental spending, for taxpayers' money, but it's not earmarked to any certain tax.
Another live stream question. What advice would you give the U.S. administration on engaging with Russia?
Well, this is not only an issue for the U.S., it's an issue for all of us. I think that we have done the right thing to show solidarity when it comes to addressing Russia. Because even though Russia is weak economically, they are very strong when it comes to the military, and they of course done a lot of things that are not acceptable. And I think that the US have done right in their response in the last few months, but because it's very important to give a clear message that the behavior of the Russian government is not to be tolerated. And then solidarity is the key, and I'm pleased to say not only the members of NATO, but also members, the Western nation, outside nation, have been quite united in the stand against Russia.
Yes, in the back of the room, please.
And blockchain. Let me start again. Regarding cryptocurrencies and blockchain, how do you generally regard the opportunities and challenges for Iceland's economy?
Could you clarify it a little bit?
Iceland has a highly educated, technical-oriented workforce. Many of the Chinese mining operations in Bitcoin have shifted to Iceland in recent months. I see that it has caused some challenges in terms of power consumption and certain other social effects. But given the technical nature of your economy and the educated workforce, can cryptocurrencies and blockchain provide opportunities for your companies?
To be honest, if you're asking about Bitcoin, then I do not understand the thing. But I see a lot of opportunities when it comes to the Icelandic economy. And what we need, though, always to bear in mind that we need to be competitive. Education is, of course, the key, but also that we have to have a flexible, open, liberal economy, which we have. And then, of course, we need to have free trade deals, which is, of course, much more than free trade. These old free trade deals, which only dealt with tariffs, are not a thing of the past, but there are regulations, investments, and a lot of taxes and other things that we need to agree with other countries. So that's where I see the opportunities, but please don't ask me about Bitcoin. I can't explain it. I have no idea.
In the front row, Mrs. Porat, please.
You have a very small population. What is the position of Iceland on immigration, and what is the situation there in terms of legal, illegal? How are you handling it, and how much interest is there in it?
Well, of course, we do have this situation that we are an island, so it's not like we have open borders to other countries. But we would like to share our responsibilities when it comes to immigration. We have, of course, horrible situation in Syria, for example. So we have been have quite a lot of immigrants, for example, from Syria, and we have done it in the past. Also, it's from the Vietnam a few decades ago, and our experience has been very good. This is hard-working people who have made a good contribution to our community. So we would like to share our responsibilities, because the problems now in Syria is the problem of all of us, whether we like it or not.
Another question from our live stream audience. Can you tell us more about Iceland's approach to gender equality?
Well, this is a priority for us, and one of the reasons for the success in the Icelandic economy is because that we have all hands on deck, and we have and at this moment, and for the last, I think, 9 years, we have been on top on the gender equality index, and we want to stay there. But we always have to bear in mind we need to do better, and now we are implementing the equal pay law, which we passed a year ago. So in short, this is one of the cornerstones, for example, of foreign policy. We advocate for gender equality on all areas, free trade, defense, when it comes to developing aid, and so on and so forth. So this is a top priority for Iceland.
Another question from the live stream audience. As the former Minister for Health, can you tell us more about healthcare in Iceland and the healthcare system?
Okay, how much time do we have? Well, in short, we could say it as similar as in other Nordic countries. If I simplify things, then I would say that it's 80% is paid by the government, 20% is paid by individuals. But even though we do have a system that the one who gets sick, he never pays a large amount in that sense, that we don't want people to have problems financing the things when it comes to health, and we do not have this health insurance system as in some countries. But it's both then public and private when it comes to simplify it, 1/3 of the sector, the health sector is privately owned, and 2/3 is owned by the government. This is just a simple description of the health system in Iceland.
Thank you. Also from our, actually in person, 5th row, please.
Some cities and countries are complaining about too much tourism, and they're putting limits on tourism. Is that a problem at all in Iceland?
No, and I would like to welcome you all to Iceland. Well, of course, we find it extremely important that the nature in Iceland is treated with respect as it deserves. But we have been fortunate to have a good guest, especially from the US, as visitors in our country. And we just hope that we will see the most of you, and we will try our best to make your trip be enjoyable.
From our live stream audience, you're here with a trade delegation. Can you tell us in what sectors is there the most promise for economic growth with Iceland and trade with other countries?
Well, traditionally, as I mentioned earlier, then we have been exporting fish and seafood, also some industrial good, and tourism is of course booming now and the largest sector. But in the near and distant future, then we see it, the fourth revolution, industrial revolution, as our thing to enlarge our economy. And we are looking into things as culture and high tech and other things. Innovation is a key. We are an open economy and a good workforce, highly educated, and there's a lot of opportunities in Iceland. So if you're an investor, then I encourage you to look at the Icelandic economy.
Also from the live stream audience, can you tell us more about your thoughts on the future of NATO?
Well, NATO has been the organization who has sustained peace for decades in Europe and in the world. I think that we have seen how important NATO is. And the Article 5 was been triggered, that was after 9/11. But now we have a different, NATO has definitely been a success story. We won the Cold War, but we have a lot of challenges now, and so extremely important that we work together. One is, as we had mentioned, that this traditional defense in that sense, and it's important that we look at all sectors in NATO. It's called 360-degree. It's both in North Atlantic and also in the south and on the border of Russia. We have the cyber threats, the terrorist threat, and to name a few. So NATO is extremely important for all its members, and it's also important that we include and enlarge NATO in a responsible way, as we have been doing. So NATO has been important. It's been a success story and will be important in at least in the near future, but I probably for a very long time.
We are nearing the end of the time for our program. I would like to welcome John Sigurdsson, the chairman of the Icelandic American Chamber of Commerce, for some closing remarks.
Yeah, this is very impressive actually, and this was very interesting. In my spare time, I'm as mentioned here, I'm the chairman of the Icelandic American Chamber of Commerce, and in my spare time, I'm the CEO of a prosthetic company in Iceland, and we 300,000 people is not very big market for prosthetic devices. And so we calculated that if we start to make our products 8 o'clock in the morning on the 2nd of January, it would take us about 15 minutes to produce prosthetic devices for Iceland. So we would actually go bankrupt. Well, it would take a long time because the lawyers would work slowly, but we would go bankrupt pretty quick if we couldn't export it to other countries. And that's underlined the minister's message here, that's trade is absolutely vital for Iceland. And that's the fundament of and the main message of his speech here. Apart for being very unusual politician in that respect, he actually said he couldn't answer a question, which is a very refreshing thing for him. That's a very few times we hear that. But for a country like Iceland, it's completely impossible for us to thrive without trade and without commerce. And the minister mentioned our remarkable journey from rag to riches, because 100 years ago we were one of the absolutely poorest countries in Europe, if not the world. And now, the reason why we have been able to achieve that is because of education and trade. Now, the minister mentioned that there is a negative forces in place, and it's very important from the business community in Iceland point of view that we use all the arguments we can to keep the trade flowing. And because that's not the reason why Iceland was able to get from rag to riches. It's very important for the world as well. Now, I don't want to have it, I want to spend too much time here because the minister will have to go on and start to work on that trade deal with USA. So I don't want you to spend too much time here. So you need to do your job. But there were three things that were discussed here, and that's security. That's very important for a country for 300,000 people. We normally don't divulge that number because of the military secret. It should be kept military secret because it's 300,000. It's dangerous. It's security. It's economy. That's basically have a money to spend, and cultural ties, which is very important as well. So. So the bottom line here is saving our home, which is security, economy, which is having a money to spend, and culture, having fun. And that's what we are doing here. We are absolutely having fun. And on behalf of Icelandic American Chamber of Commerce and American Icelandic Chamber of Commerce, that's very difficult to say actually, I want to thank the minister, Mr. Matt Abbott, for a very good handling of this crowd here, and the crowd for excellent questions and participation. Mayor Brown for the support here, and thank you very much. It was very invigorating and really nice. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we hope you will remain for the networking reception that has been generously sponsored by Mayor Brown. And now please join me in thanking Minister Thordarson for his remarks.